So we got another update, but how many videos have I started with saying that? However, we also got a number of examples of Stelle's cards so that we could better understand it. So without further ado, let's jump in and take a look at the current state of Stelle. For a little while now, we've been questioning exactly what the unique mechanics will be like. There are several videos here on the channel that cover it, from extrapolating mechanics from cards and classes that we've seen to overanalyzing every single thing Reynad says in a stream. We've gone from thinking every class will have a completely different mechanic and through that almost feel like you're playing a different game, to thinking that every class will be a different flavour of Pygmalion or Vanessa, with not much variety in mechanics at all. Naturally, we've currently landed somewhere in the middle, at least for Stelle, but even that is an uncertainty. And let me just make this exceptionally clear. Everything in this video is an uncertainty. The video on Stelle's mechanics, which I'll cover briefly at the end of this, was super vague on what the actual state of Stelle is now, and what the state will be. It just described the journey, and all of the cards we get to see are still very much in development, and were just used as examples to show the current state of Stelle. With that being said, you probably should go ahead and give the original video a watch if you haven't, or go check it out after this, links below. Right, with that out of the way, it looks like Stelle is going to have an altitude mechanic. It is something we suggested would be cool to play with, and it's looking like we might not have been too far off on how it looks. As you play through the game as Stelle, you have a value called altitude that increases and decreases based off a number of things, but we know that 2 of the 3 cards in the current cycle that we've seen change your altitude value, and all 3 of them interact with it. The current idea behind Stelle's altitude mechanic is that there are some strategies that do best with a lot of altitude, there are some that do best with little to no altitude, and there are others that like to fluctuate between high and low. So you're looking at 3 different Stelle strategies just from this unique mechanic alone, without looking at any of the cards. Naturally though, as you play throughout the game, you won't just be able to force high altitude strategies. The Bazaar doesn't have a reroll option, so you have to pivot and adapt to make sure you have a strong build at all times. Which to me sounds like the fluctuating altitude strategy will be the most commonly used one, as you're stuck somewhere between the 2, before you are able to settle into one of the other 2 builds. But who knows, with rarity still a thing, albeit behind the scenes, we could see an abundance of low altitude in the early game, building into high altitude in late game. Let me know in the comments below what sort of strategic diversity you would like to see from Stelle. Anyway, I've waffled on long enough about her mechanic in general, let's take a look at some of those cards. Gregory Marquez, so not me, he was talking to us live in my Twitch chat, so you know we can't be the same person. Actually, while on that thread, I stream on Twitch every Friday, and I don't plug it anywhere near enough here on YouTube. So come say hi, we do watch parties for every Bazaar update, and occasionally devs come hang out. If they do that, be nice, don't bombard them with questions about beta, it just makes everything worse. But feel free to come by and ask them how they're doing. Anyway, as I was saying, the lovely and enthusiastic Gregory Marquez of the Bazaar followed up his video by sharing 3 example cards with the official Bazaar Discord. Links to that below if you want the insider information like the rest of us. The 3 cards were Sandbags, Martian Lights, and Caracara? Caracara? I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. And they all loosely represented one of the 3 strategies: high altitude, low altitude, and fluctuating altitude, respectively. Firstly, let's take a look at Sandbags, a 3-cost medium weapon that every 7 seconds adds 2 altitude to your score, and then deals damage equal to double your current altitude. If we imagine the maximum altitude is 100, a nice round number, then this would help keep you near the top with that additional altitude, then deal 200 damage if you were at said maximum. Now, maybe that's a little bit crazy. With a medium item only giving you 2 altitude every 7 seconds, I imagine we're looking more in the sort of 20 or so range for what is considered high altitude, which would still be 40 damage every 7 seconds from a medium item once the battle gets going, which isn't too shabby. You can compare this to some of the items we've rated from Pygmalion and Vanessa, and this would score a solid sort of 3 to 4 core power if it was dealing 40 damage. This is of course assuming things like altitude resets every fight, and it doesn't diminish over time, and that this is a typical card that will give you altitude, but we have to jump to some conclusions here. We only have 3 cards. Next up we have the Marshalling Lights, a 2-cost small item which removes 2 altitude every 7 seconds, and has a passive effect that when you drop to 0 altitude, you heal for 25 health. We can see the potency of this next to Sandbags already with just 2 cards. If you had one of each card and nothing else, then every 7 seconds you would potentially gain 2 altitude and deal 4 damage, then lose 2 altitude and gain 25 health, with all the previous assumptions in place. Now, I'm sure there will be better low altitude cards to combo with, but you can see the beginning of something special with altitude. This is a whole different way to calculate your game. It's an extra avenue to consider, and will likely be super rewarding to those of you that can stretch those brain muscles a little bit more so than me anyway. The reward speaks for itself with our final card as well, the Caracara, a 9-cost medium weapon, which is also of the vehicle archetype. We'll get onto that in a second. Every 10 seconds, the Caracara deals 20 damage. However, it also has a passive effect. Every time you cross over the 10 altitude mark, this item does an additional plus 10 damage whenever it triggers in this fight. Now, the wording on this could be taken 2 different ways. Do you get the bonus when going from 9 up to 11, so crossing the 10 mark, or do you also get it from going 11 down to 9, crossing downwards through it? Even if it is just one way or the other, the chance to collate a series of items that keeps you in a perfect threshold, for Caracara to then trigger after 10 seconds and potentially one-shot your enemy, sounds exceptionally fun. And this is before we even consider we have yet another archetype. So it looks like the aquatic experiment with Vanessa was a success, and Stelle is going to have the vehicle subtype, which makes plenty of sense. She designs, builds, drives, and flies vehicles. That's who she is. I'm excited to see which unique effects we have within this archetype. Aquatic had a lot of poison and daze, while also some insane combos. So here's hoping for yet more wonderful strategies. The video itself, that was a preamble for all of this, which again, linked below, was the story of Stelle's development so far. Of how Gregory and the team started with a concept like altitude that was originally a very two-dimensional statistic, and that they tried to add complexity to it, which even in itself didn't feel right. By taking stuff out and not having the fear of deleting finished art or effects, or anything, and rebuilding Stelle, they have found a suitable middle ground where we are today. As you'll see, she is a very much 3-dimensional character. I can't wait to play Stelle and try out some of these mental puzzles. It's really going to feel like an aeronaut sat at my table trying to design a ship with all the numbers you have to try and balance. But, just like any great inventor, sometimes you just have to try it out for yourself when the Bazaar releases into the wild. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and ring that notification bell. You're going to want to know as the Bazaar gets closer to launch, and I'm going to be telling you, or at least shouting it as loudly as I can, when I'm allowed to. It's not yet. Just chill. Anywho, I've been Gangster Greg, and hopefully I'll catch you in the next video.